Good evening, and thank you for joining us for tonight's Justice Now conversation. We will be getting started shortly. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with everything that we have seen in the news. And I encourage you to ask questions. Feel free to drop questions in the chat, comments, and I will do my best to lift them up. Hello, how are you?
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well.
All right.
Thank you so much for joining us. I see we have a number of folks rolling onto the IG Live. But I have to say, I am really glad that we are having this conversation, knowing everything that's happening in the world. So why don't I start us off? Good evening, everyone. I am Jerica Richardson, and I serve as the Senior Vice President for Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives at the National Urban League. And I want to welcome you to tonight's Justice Now conversation. We're here to talk about the social justice backlash that we have really been seeing across the country in so many areas. And with me here today is Charles Ellison, who is a renowned journalist and radio host and so much more. And so I just want to welcome you, Charles, for joining us. And I really want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to our audience and talk a little bit about your work before we jump into the conversation. So I think Mr. Ellison might be freezing on his end. But let's see if we can get him back. For those of you who are on here right now, if you can just, okay. So it's not just me. You guys are seeing that he's off. All right, we're gonna wait for a moment. But again, we appreciate you joining in for this conversation. It looks like we lost his video. So we'll see if he's able to log off and come back in. If not, we might just restart the IG Live shortly, but I'll give it a moment. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you to all of you who have joined. Thank you for joining tonight's Justice Now conversation. We're having a few technical difficulties, but hopefully we will be up shortly. Now, for those of you in the chat, thank you. I'm happy to host this dialogue. It's one that we really need to have. For those of you, can you drop in the comment box if you're hearing me clearly and I'm still coming through fine for you? I just want to make sure if we need to restart that we do that. Good evening. Okay, great. Thanks. I'm glad you can see and hear well. Excellent. I appreciate that. Look at my Urban League family coming out. We really appreciate your support. Look, I know this topic is one that we've been talking about for quite some time. Great. It looks like our guest is working on reconnecting, and I think I see him. Hold on. Mr. Ellison.
All right, can you see me?
You're still frozen on my end, but let me check with my viewers on the other end.
All right.
Folks, I'm well. I definitely hear you.
Okay. I hear you as well. So sorry about that. How's everyone doing? Sorry, we just have some technical issues, it seems.
Yes. Just wanted to see. We can see and hear you, but not see. Okay. You're on, but I think you're frozen.
Okay.
Okay. They said they can see us both. Maybe
All right.
maybe he's just frozen. Maybe you're just frozen
All
on my end.
right.
So, my
No, no worries
apologies.
at all. I have a major severe thunderstorm coming through. It's a severe thunderstorm warning. So I'm wondering if that has a little bit to do with
It may, and it may be on my end, but you
it.
know what? I can't see your responses to everything I'm asking, but I can hear you. So
All right.
let's go
Excellent.
with that. And look, you are a radio host,
Mhm.
so we'll go
We'll work with it.
we'll
Right.
work with it. All right. Well,
Exactly.
Charles, thank you so much for joining us. I
Sure.
would love for you just to give our viewers a little bit more about your background. I talked about your
Sure.
experience in journalism, but I think I want you just to kind of set things up for us so you can talk about what perspective you'll be able to bring to this conversation.
Sure. No, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. In short, I actually started off in public affairs, worked on the state, local, federal level. I've been a senior policy aide, speechwriter. That's how I started, just as a public affairs, public policy space practitioner. I've worked for state legislators, worked for mayors, worked for members of Congress. And then transform that work and that experience expertise into the world of media. So I do, basically two things. One, I run a small strategic communications boutique and firm called BE Strategy. That takes up the bulk of my work. And a lot of that's captured at thebnote.com, of which I'm the publisher. But a lot of folks know me as I've been a long time so-called journalist. Didn't start off as a trained journalist, but I'm in the journalist world. I executive produce and host a public affairs show called Reality Check on WURD. So that's at wordradio.com, and that's daily. Also, I'm the managing editor for EcoWord, which is an environmental justice journalism initiative at WURD. In fact, we're the only Black-owned media outlet currently that does full-time journalism on environmental issues, climate justice issues, et cetera. So we do that daily. And so that's what I do. And I'm typically, Instagram is fairly new to me, so I do appreciate everyone's patience. I'm typically on Twitter at Ellison Report. Thank you.
Okay. Awesome. And well, thank you for giving us that background, and really thank you for your leadership. I think it's so important to have Black journalists and Black storytellers in this space and doing the work, because often if we are not telling the story and our story and talking about the experiences of our community, it doesn't always get lifted up.
Exactly. No, you're absolutely right. The role of Black journalists, of basically messengers, experts, and practitioners in the public affairs space is just so crucial, particularly at a time like this, right? These times are very urgent, and there is no really time for us to rest or to equivocate on that mission. That mission has always been there. We have a direct obligation to our community, the communities from which we originate, and the communities that we're obligated to serve. We wouldn't be where we are in this position. I wouldn't be hosting and executive producing a daily public affairs show, talking to hundreds and thousands of people at a time, without the efforts of people before me, without the commitment of that community from which I grew up in. I grew up in Philadelphia. And there are a lot of issues and challenges that Black Philadelphians especially face every day, have been facing for generations, for centuries. And we can never forget that. So we have a very special and unique, I always say that Black journalists are different from just your mainstream or normal journalistic professionals. We have unique obligations, and we have unique missions that are, we're not just regular average journalists who go to journalism school and then we're just supposed to report or on both sides of the story or talk about it. No, we have a special obligation because as Black people, we are always faced with existential threats. And so it's important for us as Black journalists to highlight those threats, to make people aware of those threats. But more importantly, Jerica, it's extremely critical for us to, devise, to have conversations about how we respond adequately to those. And I think that, especially just one critique of the Black media space now, the modern Black media space, I don't think we do enough of that, so there's some Black journalists out there who are thinking, oh, I got to talk about both sides of an issue. Well, you know what? You don't have that luxury. We don't have that luxury as a community. Unfortunately, that's not a situation I created. That's not a situation we created. That just is the situation, the urgency of the moment that we find ourselves in.
Well, thank you for that. I actually started my career out in journalism, broadcast journalism, and worked in public radio and television, and then went to network television. So I understand the importance of there being Black voices at the table and obviously driving the conversation. It really is mission-driven work. And so I want to take a step back and really hear from you how you would define this social justice Black backlash that we are seeing across the country. And really, can you kind of lay out for us what are some of the exact problems or issues that we are experiencing right now?
Right. It's a very good question. It's a question we need to constantly ask ourselves, particularly in this moment. We saw some of that discussed and explained, right, in today's January 6th committee hearing, which focused on the evolution of white nationalist, white terrorist organizations who coordinated with Trump on attacking the U.S. Capitol, attacking the seat of government last year, January 6th. So that was basically what I like to call white lash. It's not so much a social justice backlash. It really is a white lash, and I'm borrowing the title from a book that the late brother Terry Smith wrote. He wrote it at the time. It was released by Cambridge University Press. I encourage everyone to get a copy of it if they can. And unfortunately, he transitioned shortly after the release of that book. He was a law professor, but he explained how white voters and certain elements within the white population, they get very angry when Black people flex their political power. That's why we're having this conversation about Black people voting. Should Black people vote? Absolutely, that's a non-negotiable conversation. And you see how people are reacting with having this visceral reaction. White people are having this visceral reaction to Black people voting and flexing in a very mighty way, like what we did in 2020. That's exactly what happened on January 6, 2021. It was a white lash, and it was a very violent one at that. But we've seen that throughout the centuries, right? We've seen that also in the aftermath of major moments when we've passed public policy that benefits us, like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 or the Voting Rights Act of 1965, right? So, those moments, or you see that white lash, and this is what Professor Smith had described, where in major elections like presidential elections or even other state, local, federal elections, certain segments of the white population respond in a very hostile way. And they do that at the ballot, and they do that in other ways as well when they identify candidates that they deem closely or too closely aligned with Black or too friendly to Black interests. So that backlash is a white lash.
My apologies for that. I think we lost Mr. Ellison. It looks like he hung up and is coming back on. Now, am I freezing on your end, folks? I see he's no longer on. Thank you for flagging that. We'll see if we can get him back on. Am I freezing on your end? Are you hearing me loud and clear? Let me know. Okay, thank you. We will wait to see him rejoin. You know, sometimes it can be tricky with the internet, but I do want to shout out the fact that we saw um, folks. We saw some folks from South Africa in the chat, which I'm so excited about that because I want folks, when we're having this conversation, yes, we're talking about what's happening nationally here in the United States, but this backlash uh, that we're talking about, we're seeing it elsewhere. We're seeing it across the world. We're seeing it in other countries. And so glad that we have folks joining us from the continent, you know, from our homeland, from Africa and other places. Because when we talk about the backlash, it really is a response to progress. It really is a response to people of color, Black people, and others, and allies pushing forward and moving forward in a positive, meaningful, strong way. And so, you know, we wouldn't be seeing us moving forward and then dealing with the pushback if it wasn't quite clear that we had been making ground and that we are really changing the conversation, having a huge impact on policy, on representation, and what have you. So this backlash is to be expected. Hopefully, we will be joined by Mr. Ellison soon. I want to stay focused on you all. So my colleagues, if they're that may be watching, if there's any information you have for me, please drop it in the chat or come knock on the door. But hopefully we'll be joined soon. But I just really want to thank you all for, one, being a part of our Justice Now conversation. I really want to thank you for joining us. I know we talk about different topics. It looks like we have Mr. Ellison back. So let me see if I can get him on the line.
Okay.
Hi, Charles. Thank you for joining us. Look, Instagram does not want us to be great this evening,
Right.
but
You know
we're
what?
going to do it. This is it's because we're talking about an important conversation.
Right. Instagram's really climate crisis because there's a massive, where I live, there's a massive storm that's coming through. So it literally, there's outages. I cut
Oh,
out
wow.
because quick outage. Yeah. So I appreciate it. It's calming
Well,
down a little bit, but it was a severe thunderstorm that's coming through now. So it's
got it.
a lot of
So
lightning. Yeah.
Instagram, forgive me. It's not your fault.
Yeah.
We're clearing up the record. But Charles, it's great to have you back on.
All
We were talking about backlash, and I think you
right.
threw out a really important term, white lash, and you
Right.
flagged that there is a book on the subject that's out there. I wanted to share with you that we were in the chat. We had folks that were coming in from not just the United States of America, but we have folks from South Africa and elsewhere. And I think it's just indicative of the progress that we have been seeing people of color make all across the world, that at the same time, we're now experiencing this pushback. Charles, can you still hear me? Hey, hey, Charles, what's the last thing you heard, my friend? Thank you, Fatine, for sharing that and lifting us up, y'all. Fatine is our producer. So if Charles comes in and out right now, we just really want to flag that it's weather related where he is. So you know what, folks? Let's do this because I want to make sure um, that we continue to make space for this conversation. I'll flag that we were initially going to be joined by Ebony Riley from the National Action Network. And she's not going to be able to join us today, but I will say that Ebony has also been a very staunch leader in the fight and has been doing the work. And she serves as really my counterpart at the National Action Network. She was going to be joining us for this conversation. And it looks like the technical difficulties really remain. I'm going to try to get Charles on here one more time, but if we're not able to, know that we will have this conversation again and that we will continue to have it. All right. Well, I will say this, at the National Urban League, we are really looking forward to continuing this conversation and talking about how we work strategically to resist and push back on the challenges that we see as it relates to this social justice backlash here in America. It's one that's ongoing. And I think we just have to take a look at history and remember how important it is to stay the course and to keep doing the work and to think strategically about how to move forward. I see some of my colleagues in the chat, and I want to flag for you that the National Urban League's national conference, we're in person, y'all, is happening next week, starting the 20th in Washington, D.C. It'll be July 20th through the 23rd. And we will have a conversation on this very topic in person. And know that our conference is live streamed, it's virtual. So if you're not able to join us in person in Washington, D.C., you can go online at nul.org, nulconference.org, thank you, and join us. We're going to be talking about this issue as well as a host of other issues that are really impacting our community. We really have a power-packed lineup. And so I hope you will join us and check it out. You know, I'm disappointed that we weren't able to have both Ebony and Charles fully on this evening, but I really do want to thank Charles for his work in journalism, and we will be sure to have him back because I think it's important. We have policy experts on and lawmakers on all the time and activists and advocates, but it's important that we tell our story as Black people. It's important that we talk about Roe versus Wade and its impact on our community. It's critically important that we talk about the Second Amendment and guns getting into the hands of people, young people, folks with mental health challenges, but really, just really how we are grappling with so many of these issues in America. And I'll be honest, Black people, the Latinx community, the Asian community, and others, and quite frankly, a lot of our allies in the Jewish community are bearing the brunt of this. And so it's a wake-up call for all of us in America, and it's a reminder that we must be engaged. We can't just vote in one election. We got to continue to vote because elections have consequences. And what we have seen in the Supreme Court of late is indicative of that. And so I want to encourage all of you. Now, I know so many of you that join these calls are very active in the movement and are doing the work, but I definitely want to put a special shout out to our younger folks that are are able to vote for the first time maybe this year. We have midterm elections coming up. So when we're talking about critical race theory, we're talking about taking away a woman's right to choice and really power over their own bodies, when we're talking about losing our babies and our children, you know, all across the country in one violent massacre after another, if we're talking about the upticks in violence in our own communities, we got problems, y'all. We've got problems. We've got work to do, and that's what the show is about. We're here to talk about solutions and what each and every person can do to move us forward. So I thank you for all who have joined us, all who have tuned in. I want to thank Charles Ellison for his work, and we look forward to continuing to have him back. So once again, thank you for joining us for this Justice Now conversation. We'll be talking about the social justice backlash, not only tonight, but again on Justice Now and next week in Washington, D.C. at the National Urban League Convention. So please join us. Go to nulconference.org, join us online, join us in person if you're able to, and definitely join us for Justice Now 2 weeks from now on July 26th. We're going to be talking about more of these issues that affect our community. Remember, the time for justice is always now. Be well, be safe, and keep the faith, y'all.